Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here for SELEP's board meeting. We have some apologies. The apologies are from Professor Karen Cox, Mark Curley, Penny Shimmin, Councillor Kevin Bentley, who is substituted by Councillor Lee Scott, welcome Lee, and Carol Ford. As you could just heard, the meeting is being recorded, and obviously the normal rules of Zoom apply. I think we're all pretty used to them now, but if you could keep yourself muted unless you're speaking, and if you could use either the raise hand function or raise your hand physically when you want to speak, and also in the process of votes. And can I ask that you don't use the chat function for items that are material to the discussion, because they're not publicly accessible. When we move to votes, as per normal, again, we'll ask people to lower their raised hands between any votes, so we're crystal clear on the numbers for each item. So let's move swiftly on to minutes from the from the October meeting. Please, can you confirm whether you see them as an accurate record of the meeting? Yep. Okay, great, thank you. Can I now ask for any declarations of interest for board meetings, for this board meeting? Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, under agenda item number 7, a declaration in relation to Barnhorn Green.
Okay, thank you. And I think that means, just for clarity, that you won't be able to vote on that matter, I believe. Am I right? Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you. David Rayner. Have your hand up? No?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah. Sorry, were you asking for any matters arising from the minute?
I was asking for declarations of interest. I thought as far as we can go on to matters arising in a minute.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, I've just checked. There's no other declarations of interest. No. Okay. We've got no public questions. David, do you have a matter arising?
Well, it was just item 3.6, where Councillor Bentley was giving the summary of the position in Essex on devolution, and he said everyone has been fully briefed and kept on board and had their say. I just want it to be noted that actually Success Essex Board has not been briefed at all, has not had any say whatsoever, and has no idea what's going on. So it would be nice, despite Essex being our secretariat, so it would be nice if we understand what's happening. We understand that the County Council doesn't want to use the existing federated boards, but it would be nice if we had been kept informed of what was happening and had been asked for our views and contributions.
Thank you, David. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, sir. Obviously, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I can't really comment on the minutes. That would be wrong. But I will make officers aware, David, of that, of what you've just said. So I will take that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Okay, thank you. Any other matters arising? Perry.
I should say, from an OSC perspective, Sarah, not to go against what David said, but we have been briefed, partly more often than not because we've forced ourselves in the door to be briefed. But I can't say that the OSC has not been briefed. Has it been ideal? No. But have we been briefed? I have to say we have.
Okay, thank you, Perry. Okay, let's move on, unless there are any other comments, to the governance update. Helen. I just want to say, Helen, before you do this, just want all of the members of the board to realise that Helen has got a very sore throat and is not actually 100%. So one, I want to thank her for being here when she's not very well, and two, I just want us to be mindful of that if we ask her lots of questions. So thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. Well, hopefully this first item will be quite quick. as directors have already been notified verbally at previous board meetings of member changes that have occurred over the year. So the report provides an update of the composition of the board, including the resignation and appointment of replacement private sector directors to the South East SELEP Limited Company over recent months. To note that there have been no changes to co-opted directors to the South East since the update provided to the board in September 22. But as you're aware, in terms of our articles, a private sector director means, in addition to the chair and deputy chair, that we will have 2 business representatives nominated by Success Essex, 2 by Opportunity South Essex, 5 by Kenton Medway, and 3 by East Sussex. And upon a vacancy arising, a replacement needs to be appointed by the area, as has happened on these occasions. So as said, members have been made aware of these changes verbally as they've occurred at previous meetings, but we are required to note that these appointments, and resignations formally. That's all I wanted to say, Sarah. So
thanks, Helen. So in terms of due process, we are asked to note the resignation and appointment of these various private sector directors. So some of, which we have all discussed, I think, before, but note the resignation of Graham Peters, effective June 2023. Note the appointment of David Shepherd, effective June 2023. Note the appointment of Mark Curley, effective July 2023. Note the resignation of Matthew Arnold, effective September 2023. Note the resignation of Joe James, effective December 2023. Note the appointment of David Millen, effective December 2023. Note the appointment of Andrew Metcalf, effective December 2023. And I'd just like to both say huge thank you to those members, and I'm going to say something a bit later, Joe, to just warning, to all of those private sector members who've given so much whilst they've been on this board, and to welcome the new members, some of whom have been to several of these meetings already, but welcome to you all. Thank you very much for being part of this important board. Thank you. Okay, so as long as you are all happy with those notes, let's move on to SELEP integration plan, please. Helen, over to you again.
thank you, Sarah. I will just share my screen with you. And she says,
David, whilst we're waiting for that, did you have something you wanted to say? You're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. Just while we're waiting, I just wanted to mention about we haven't mentioned Clive Soper as being upgraded to represent the board today. I think he's on the call, but
Apologies.
I'm now here.
So if we could include him just as a matter of course, please.
Yes.
As a voting member.
As attending today, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, apologies for that.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks.
You.
Helen.
hi, can you everyone see my screen? Just check. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. So I'm just going to take you through some headlines, particularly focusing on the areas that directors are being asked to sort of agree or note today. Just about the plan itself, you may have noted that the format of the final plan is a little different from the draft that was presented in October, and I just wanted to set out sort of the main reasons for that are to hopefully provide greater clarity on the work to be done, in what time frame and by which partner, present a clearer and more detailed excuse me, risk register, to make it easier to update the plan on a regular basis, sort of presenting information about activity in the current quarter, and then being able to update future activity in the further sections, and also to present any progress implications on the critical path as we move forward. So I just wanted to note that they're the main reasons why we've sort of changed the structure of the plan a little. I also just wanted to note that the plan is being presented obviously to you as a final integration plan, but it is a working document, so it will be updated as more detail is known and as the activity progresses. So I just wanted to very quickly, before we get into the detail, revisit the aims that this plan underpins. There are no material changes to this from what you've seen in October, so I don't intend to read it out, but I thought I'd just put it up on screen so that you had a chance to recap on that briefly before we carried on. So this is basically what a successful integration we feel will look like once the plan is completed and concluded. So moving on to progress, the main areas of progress achieved since we last met. So starting with governance and capital programme, formal letters have now been submitted to government to request the changes in accountable body arrangements from April. Excuse me. These were submitted last Friday on the 1st of December. However, in parallel to drafting these, you may recall from our October meeting that we had already sent a number of email clarifications to DLUC following the issue of their guidance in August. And on the 16th of November, we did receive a reply to some of those, which you have in Appendix B to the paper. But in relation to this point, we were given good indication that government is willing to release Essex Council as the accountable body, and the upper tier local authorities will be able to have accountability for their own projects from April. The part that we are hoping that the formal response to our letters will confirm, though, is the process through which we achieve this, and partly whether that is something that we need to arrange locally once that approval is given, or whether government will need to be party to that process somehow. So whilst we await that formal response, we are still progressing work in this area, and we've reviewed and updated the position in terms of all contracts and agreements. We've also identified and continue to identify the key aspects to be transferred, and that's so that we're in as good a place as possible to move forward once we hear back from government. We also have received 2 further clarifications. One, firstly, is that we will only be required to monitor and report on the capital programme up until March 2025, but also that there will be a new assurance framework issued for non-devolved areas, which we believe is to be an amended version of the English devolution framework. Excuse me. We don't have a specific timeline for this, but we are hoping that we will receive this in January. And as of today, we are still waiting some further clarification on whether local authorities will be working to this new framework for our legacy capital programmes, or whether there will be a requirement still to comply with the existing one, and that the new one will apply for obviously new areas of work and funding going forward. Lastly, 3 submissions were made to DLUC that set out what LEP activities and functions will continue by local authorities post-April, and these were provided in Appendix C to the paper you received. So moving on to Growth Hub and business support. Firstly, a great piece of news, obviously, that the Growth Hub funding for 24-25 was confirmed in the autumn statement, which we're obviously pleased about. However, there obviously is still urgent need for confirmation of that funding allocation and how that will be applied. So this continues to be pushed very heavily at the Growth Hub network meetings, as well as through the LEP network nationally. We have now had it confirmed by East Sussex and Kent County Councils, and in principle by Essex County Council, that they will act as accountable body for growth hubs in their area from April onwards, obviously subject to that allocation announcement, of course. And East Sussex has also confirmed that the service will continue to be delivered in-house. We've also put that proposal for the 3 independent accountable bodies to DBT to gain their agreement. We know that for many around the country, the Growth Hubs activity will continue to exist on the LEP geographies. We are asking for a deviation from that, but we are yet to receive a response on that matter. And lastly, we have clarified that the CRM provider for Growth Hubs will continue to provide data access post-transition. So they're just some of the key areas around those. Lastly, on progress, work has continued in terms of determining the future operating model for those SELEP-wide groups that it's been agreed will continue to be supported post-April, and we continue our dialogue with these groups in relation to that. Work has also progressed around resourcing of LEP functions within local authorities and retaining the expertise of the SELEP team to support that. Since we last met, we have now received 10 job descriptions from local authorities and have been working with Essex County Council HR and Legal as our accountable body around due process and considerations around the most appropriate routes for consultation. So, moving on to risks and the critical path. As you'll see in the plan, we have added a new risk register, but the key risks and dependencies that we have remain as are set out on this slide. A lot of sub-risks that sit around it, but these are the kind of core ones we believe that we are monitoring. In terms of the Q3 critical path, the paper outlines that we did miss 2 deadlines on this. First was relating to that formal submission to government around the future accountable body arrangements. But however, this is partly mitigated by the clarification we have already received, but also through regular liaison with DLUC, we have been given some assurances that a response will still be forthcoming within a timescale that won't negatively impact on our Q4 path. And as also mentioned, we are doing quite a lot of preparatory work on this so that we are as ready as we can be once we receive that response from government. Excuse me. The second was around commencing the staff consultation. This has experienced some delay, partly due to some slippage in receipt of job descriptions and the subsequent work that's been needed to assess and map these, but also around some internal ECC processes and discussions around those routes of consultation and the integration of the team. But as I said, this has progressed and we should be in a position to move forward imminently. So moving on to the Q4 critical path. This is obviously key as it is our last quarter. So this is a very critical time. And in order to achieve this, what I put on the screen there are what we consider the kind of main tasks and decisions that will need to take place. Again, there are a number of sub-activities that sit underneath these. But in the critical path within the plan, which I think is on page 9 of the plan, obviously that presents to you the timeline for when these ideally need to be concluded by. But it's undoubtable there are a lot of key milestones to be reached next quarter, and we will continue to monitor those closely, both within the LEP and ECC as the accountable body, but also through our monthly meetings with local and regular discussions with local authority senior officers to ensure that we remain on track. Obviously, for the SELEP plan to be successful, it does need to dovetail with local plans to ensure that arrangements are in place within the local areas post-April. And whilst authorities obviously have been developing their own local plans, which are kind of at varying stages of development, further clarity has been captured in the templates that were issued by government and then submitted by local authorities on the 30th of November. Government requested information from local authorities on future ways of working, particularly on how the business voice will be represented, the functions to transfer and the geography in which they will be delivered over. And as said, our submissions set this out under 3 sort of functional economic areas of East Sussex, Greater Essex and Kent and Medway. And those templates broadly covered the functions that you can see in blue on your screen there around sort of local strategics, sort of business boards, the growth hub delivery, economic strategy and data, monitoring reporting on capital programme, and around the kind of partnerships and stakeholder work. So just a point to note on this, that obviously local authorities are still awaiting that further guidance from government on their future expectations. So areas may well have to obviously make further refinements to their plans on the back of that once received. We do believe, though, that these templates are consistent with the SELEP plan and therefore provide a good sort of one voice proposition to government from across the LEP area. And as such, they obviously have been put forward for your endorsement today. So just my penultimate, excuse me, my penultimate slide is around funding in 2024-25. So based on current forecasts, SELEP does expect to have uncommitted residual budget in the next financial year. As said earlier, through the integration planning that we've been doing, authorities have identified resourcing needs around LEP functions and have scoped out roles and responsibilities around these. As we know, not only is the sort of fiscal landscape extremely challenging generally, there is also an additional lack of clarity on core funding from government at present, presenting quite a challenging position for local authorities in relation to resourcing transition functions going forward. So given this, and in line with the consistent desire by directors of this board to retain the sort of SELEP knowledge, experience and skills within authorities, the paper suggests that the board endorse the principle that those uncommitted funds would be released to support resourcing within local authorities post-April, and as such the integration of the LEP team where this is required and possible. But please note, this isn't about the detail of the funding or how that is applied. That is for the accountability board. This is about an endorsement of the principle of this and that direction of travel. So just on my last slide, I wanted just to use this opportunity just to draw your attention to some wider activities that the LEP is undertaking linked to transition. And this is part of ensuring that the intelligence, expertise and kind of lessons learnt around the LEP can be considered by partners within their future working arrangements. So firstly, one already happened, which in November we had a webinar around our revenue-based projects, in particular those that were EU funded. I believe we had a 70 strong attendance and it was a really successful event, so it's a great start. But coming up in the new year, we're also planning for an interactive impact report around our capital programme, and also holding a successful sort of partnerships seminar in February, and looking for that to conclude with an in-person event in March following our board meeting, which would comprise of kind of panel discussions and debate on particular themes, probably led by an independent chair, involving obviously the LEP, local authorities, as well as representatives from across the federated areas and our working groups. This is really an opportunity for us to engage with all our stakeholders as part of passing the baton, I guess, as it were, celebrating our collective achievements, but also hearing about the future, the future of local growth under the new arrangements post-April. So more information on these will follow to the board and wider partners, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to make you aware of them if you weren't already. So that's all for me, Sarah, on the plan. Just as before, though, I'd just like to extend my sincere thanks to the team for all their hard work on this during, a very challenging time, and also to local authority officers for continuing to engage and progress the work with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And I absolutely endorse all of the amazing work that has been happening on this. A huge thank you to team and towards the other officers, and a huge thank you to you, Helen, who you've come in at a very difficult junction of the LEP, and you've dealt with it absolutely brilliantly, so thank you. And also thanks to the accountable body too for all of the work that they've done. Okay, is Greg with us? And maybe from oh, there you are. Thank you. Sorry, I've got lots of people on my screen. It's sometimes hard to see everyone. Greg, I didn't know whether, before we go into any discussion and questions from the team, I didn't know whether there was anything you were able to give us an update at all from government.
Thanks, Sarah. No, in short, so we're still awaiting the further guidance for local authorities on integration and transition. That's due out by January. We're working as quickly as possible to get it out, but as of yet, the latest update was the confirmation of the Growth Hub funding at Awesome Statement, and we haven't heard anything else since then. As Helen said in her update, we're working to reply to the letters that we were sent on accountable body arrangements and hoping to get a response out by the end of next week. If not, it will be before Christmas. So that'll be the kind of next substantive update that will come from us.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Right, let's open it up now to any comments or questions from the group. Jo.
Thank you for that, Helen. That was all very clear. Can I just ask about a little bit more clarity about the employment opportunities within the federated boards for the remaining staff. I mean, our priority from the start has always been about looking after the team. You know, we all agree that from day one, and we've known for a long time now when our closing date's going to be. So I just need a little reassurance that we're doing everything possible to ensure the most timely positive outcome we can for them. And we've just got probably about just over 3 months left to go. So it really is vital that we start that sort of formal redundancy notice period. And I'm not sure what the procedure and timescales are for putting forward the employment opportunities that have come up from the federated areas to the team. You know, what we all want really just to have the smoothest transition we can if they're going to go into other roles.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Helen.
Thanks, Jo. No, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the reason we've had some delay that we've had is because we're very keen to make sure that that consultation is undertaken on the right premise and on the right basis. And obviously receiving the local authority job descriptions need to form part of that process. But in order to do that, we've had to work with HR and legal within Essex County Council to make sure that we've kind of followed due process around assessing those. All of the right employment law considerations are being given to those. This has been discussed an awful lot at LEP network meetings. Every LEP is grappling with various considerations around applications of 2P and the right kind of process for consultations and things like that. So we're not unique at all in sort of grappling with some of these issues, because it is a bit of a grey area in terms of functions transitioning, but not in quite a simple way in the sense that they do maybe in other situations. So that has taken a little longer, but I think the very positive thing that I think we have is that we have a number of job descriptions. We are only a small team in the LEP Secretariat anyway, and there are a number of job descriptions on the table from local authorities to be able to provide those employment opportunities to the team. So now it's just the final stage really of agreeing the exact process through which we take that forward, because you don't necessarily need to follow a full statutory consultation if you're going down a certain route. I don't want to get too much into the detail on the call, Jo, because I don't probably think it's quite appropriate with sort of people on the call, but just to say that is progressive. It has been slightly delayed, but we are going to progress that imminently, and we will be talking to local authority partners about it next week.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or queries from Team Simon?
Sarah, thanks. And I just wanted to underline what you'd said earlier, really. I think if we went back 6 months ago, when many of us as directors were in Dartford discussing what we would do around transition and how we would plan it, I think, as Helen said in her presentation, the work that the team in SELEP and the work of our up-tier local authorities has been really good to be in a position where we're looking like we're going to get an orderly transition. I know it's much easier said than it is done, and there is a heck of a lot of work under the tip of the iceberg that's taking place that's having a real effect. So I just wanted to make sure that was recorded and noted for everybody. I guess, Helen, you've got a lot of stuff that I know you and the team are doing. Is there anything that's still keeping you awake at night that you need our help or support with?
Thanks, Simon. Good question, Helen.
I may take those answers separately. So there's a lot of things keeping me awake at night, including my cold at the moment. But I don't think specifically. I mean, in all honesty, I think we are progressing sort of as well and at the pace as we can at the moment, with some of the obviously the milestones still to be reached in terms of formal decisions and outcomes being made. But I think that something that as a collective I think need to possibly try and be a little tighter on is being clear about our governance timeline across the LEP and all of the 6 authorities. I think we are building up a much stronger picture on that, but I think we've still got a little more work to do to be very clear that we've got all those decisions lined up in exactly the way that they need to be made. That's again isn't quite as easy as it's easier said than it is done, because we are awaiting on certain outcomes that feed into that. But I think other than that, actually, well, you know, work is progressing pretty well around the transition.
Thanks, Helen. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Apologies, I'm ill as well, which you can probably hear from my voice. I sound like a 2-pack a day smoker, so apologies for that. Just a question that I've raised previously. Thank you for the update, Helen. It's really helpful. In terms of the transition, just a practical consideration about whether we consider whether you know, the best approach is for us to have a kind of drop dead date of 31st of March, where everything after that immediately transfers over, or whether actually as an additional risk mitigation, whether we are allowed to, or whether it would be helpful to investigate whether there are some aspects of the transition that could happen before then, just to make sure that it's managed in the best way possible.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that there probably are actually things that could potentially progress sooner. I don't think everything has to transition at all on necessarily a 31st of March deadline. I think there are certain things that that would, such as things like the obviously the transfer of accountable body status and the monitoring of capital probe, because I don't think we could achieve it before that time easily, but also because of obviously new frameworks and things being put in by government as of the 1st of April. So there are certain things, I think, even if we could do it quicker, we would want to work to that 31st of March deadline. However, there are other things potentially that could transition sooner, and certainly sort of going back to the sort of the opportunity, the resourcing opportunities, if you like, within local authorities. There are some areas where you know, staff transitioning sooner potentially, or at least working closer with authorities sooner, could be very advantageous, and I think we are exploring those as part of the planning. Certainly some of the partnership work potentially, if that can be agreed and transitioned earlier, that, you know, that could be done. So I think it is a bit of a mix. I think you know, there are certain things I think that we need to work to the 31st regardless. Other things I think we could potentially look to progress, and we have started to have some of those conversations. I wouldn't say we've sort of pinned anything down definitively yet, but I think we are collectively having that discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope you feel better soon too, Lauren. Okay, unless there are any other questions, I'd like us to whether we agree the final SELEP integration plan. Do you all agree it as presented? Thank you. And that's great. And note the progress made and the impact on the critical path and the remaining key risks highlighted in the paper that you've just had in front of you, and the integration plan. Do we endorse the DLUC-LEP integration templates submitted to government by East Sussex, Greater Essex and Kent and Medway? And endorse the utilisation of uncommitted SELEP residual funds, revenue funds for application, let me just be really clear about endorse the utilisation of uncommitted SELEP residual revenue funds for application in the 2024-25 to support LEP function resourcing in UTLAs, noting that this will be subject to final decision to be made by the Accountability Board. Okay, great. Thank you very much all. Okay, as Helen talked about the UTLA updates on integration plan, it would be really useful to hear from the local authorities. So Councillor Edwards, can I pick on you first, and then you can save your voice for some of the rest of the time. Is there any progress you'd like to update us with?
There is, but I think Roger was planning to give an update, so I'll let him go first. And if he's particularly for my voice, if I've got anything to add, I'll come in after him, if that's okay.
All right, that of course. Thank you, Councillor Goff.
Okay, if I come in, and thanks, Lauren. Yes, this is obviously in relation to the work of both Kent and Medway, and a lot of it, frankly, plays back what was mentioned by Helen in her presentation. So, yeah, submitted the DLUC transition template on 30th of November. A lot of work going on with, clearly this is the two upper tier local authorities, but with district colleagues within Kent and of course within with our business partners across Kent and Medway in taking the whole thing forward. Just ticking off, and again, I think Helen set out the list at the start, some of the things that we are doing. We've got a Kent and Medway economic framework, which has been worked on for quite some time, actually, and that's being finalised and will cover both the sort of wider economic strategy and the specific work streams that were covered by SELEP. We have Kent and Medway Economic Partnership as, in effect, our sort of foundational body that will be taking forward the work, and that we're looking at the structures of and around that, and a great deal of work again going on that. So we have bodies such as, for example, the Employment Task Force, which I chair, which is both Kent and Medway focused, how we build up the relationship between that and other bodies with KMEP. And then some of the, as I say, some of the areas that Helen mentioned, data and intelligence, the Growth Hub service, the taking on the accountable body status, all of those significant work streams going forward at the moment, and looking as though we are on course to deliver all that. Again, picking up the point that was raised by Jo in her question and Helen's answer, an important thing for us still is getting those further details about potential transfer of staff from April. Also, actually, the use of any potential residual funding. So those are key issues for us. But as I say, sounds as though very much in progress from the SELEP side as well as from our own. And clearly we need to get all the legal agreements in place in terms of the handover from Essex in terms of accountable body functions. So I think we're comfortable that at the Kent and Medway level, the work is going ahead, and we seek to work well with our colleagues both in SELEP and in Essex as accountable body to tie it all up with a bow.
Thank you, Councillor Gough. Okay, Councillor Edwards, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, just briefly, just to endorse everything that Roger said, I think although the submission that we've given, makes factual accuracy in terms of saying that, we aren't involved in KCC's devolution discussions at the moment with government, and don't find the current Devo offer from government attractive. We are very committed to working with KCC to deliver the LEP functions across the economic region. And I think that's very clear in the template we submitted to government. Just in terms of Medway's own appropriate governance, just to let people know, we have a cabinet paper that we're planning to take through on transition of the LEP functions in January.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I also join everyone with, I also have a sore throat. Maybe it's gone round over Zoom, I don't know. Right, just to give a brief report. In order to develop plans for integration across Greater Essex, Essex County Council officers have been working collaboratively with colleagues from Southend and Thurrock to agree an integration plan for all the 3 UTLAs. As part of the work, we will enter into a partnership agreement to set up the specifics of how LEP functions will be delivered. The partnership agreement will formalise mechanisms and arrangements to manage the integration process at a Greater Essex level. The arrangement will clearly articulate the functions and responsibilities assigned to each UTLA and those which are to be completed at a Greater Essex level. As SELEP board members will know from Councillor Bentley's update to previous SELEP strategic board meetings, the Greater Essex is in negotiation with government regarding a potential devolution deal. The outcome of those negotiations is expected prior to Christmas or could be shortly after. Will inform our integration plans. If the devolution deal is agreed with government, it will be necessary for Greater Essex UTLAs to deliver an interim arrangement across the Greater Essex before LEP functions move across to the proposed combined county authority. Should a devolution deal not be agreed with government, the interim arrangements agreed will continue. Given the proposed devolution, Greater Essex UTLAs are already establishing new strategic relationships and with businesses and will continue to work closely with these businesses to shape future arrangements. As for government guidelines, a full, open and transparent recruitment process will take place to create the new board. This process will take place following the expected announcement from government in January regarding the future role of business. That's basically our position at this current stage while we await government decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I don't believe that there's any councillors from Southend or Thurrock on this at this board meeting at the moment, so I won't bring them in. But Councillor Glazier, if you're there, are you able to?
I am here, and I'm panicking like mad because I've been away from the office in Southend for 2 days, and I've just checked my briefing. I can't find the briefing that I need on this. I've just phoned Richard Dawson, and it's on its way. So, if there's anybody else who needs to contribute, then please do. And my apologies for not being as fully briefed as I should be this morning.
No worries. I know you've been out and about this week hugely. Are there any comments or questions from anybody whilst we wait for anything? No. Okay. I think what we might do, Councillor Glazier, I mean, unless there's anything particularly pertinent that you want to that you feel is really important to bring up, shall we move on?
I think that's the best thing to do. And as I say, apologies again. If there's anything drastic, I will interrupt the meeting sometime during the course, if that's okay.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Lorna. God, I'm getting a sore throat now too. I'm going to hand over to Lorna to go through the 2022-23 accounts. Thank you, Lorna.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody. So this item brings back a bit of a retrospective consideration as we're looking back to the position from last financial year, but obviously this is a clear due process that we need to be taking into account to review the 22-23 financial position and the accounts. I'll just share my screen if that's okay. Hoping. There we go. Hopefully that's come up for you. Great, thank you. So today we're just looking at the statement of accounts for SELEP for 22-23 for consideration by the board, and in addition we're also looking at the company accounts for the South East Limited, which also need to be approved by the board. And just briefly, I'll just talk through why we have two sets of accounts. When the company was first formed in March 2020, it was agreed by the board that none of the financial transactions or assets in relation to SELEP would be operated through the company, as the pre-existing position of the financial management by the accountable body, as overseen by the accountability board, would continue as the most appropriate arrangement. It's a requirement, however, for accounts to be prepared for a company even though it isn't trading. So as a consequence, we have two sets of accounts that have been prepared, both of which have been included in your board papers. The first is the SELEP statement of accounts, which reflects the financial position managed by the accountable body on behalf of SELEP. The balance sheet from those accounts is included on this slide, which sets out the financial position for SELEP as recorded in the accounts as at the 31st of March 2023. The second set of accounts balance sheet shows a zero position across all elements, confirming that there's been no expenditure or income or assets held with respect to the company during 22-23. It's a requirement for the board to agree the accounts for the company, and that they are then submitted to Companies House as part of the formal company reporting. To be aware, there's been as there's been no financial transactions made by the company and no assets are held, the company is considered to be dormant. This means that the accounts for the South East LEP Limited are not required to be audited. The SELEP statement of accounts, however, have been subject to external audit to assure that they reflect the financial position managed by the accountable body on behalf of SELEP. And as advised back in October, at the October meeting of the board, the outcome of the audit was to confirm that the financial statements have been prepared in all material respects in accordance with the financial reporting provisions of the Local Authority Code of Practice, and there's nothing material to report to the board from the auditors with respect to any inaccuracies or misstatements identified within the accounts. In recognition that some members of the board are not familiar with local authority account format, some summary tables have been included in the covering paper for the accounts to demonstrate the underlying cash movement in the reserves, the application of grant funding, and the simplified balance sheet position. On this slide, it demonstrates the impact of all these movements on the cash position for SELEP, which saw a reduction of the overall cash held by the accountable body on behalf of SELEP through the year from 34.8 million to 19.9 million at the 31st of March 2023. The majority of that 19.9 million is made up of the capital grants that we hold in respect of GPF. In addition, as we had GBF funds, that's Getting Building Fund and Growing Places Fund. So the Getting Building Fund returned during 22-23 following the cancellation of a number of projects, of which we had £7 million return. £4 million of that was reallocated again during the 22-23 financial year, which left us with 3.79 million carried forward on the balance sheet into 23-24. Of that amount, 2,049,000 remains uncommitted and is planned to be awarded at the January Accountability Board, and that's been discussed further on the agenda today under the Capital Programme update. With respect to the revenue grants position, all remaining revenue grants were applied or repurposed during 22-23, with no grants remaining on the balance sheet at the end of the year. Just as for information, in the current year, the only new revenue grants that have been received are in respect of the core funding that came from DLUC, of which and the Growth Hub funding. Both of these grants are expected to be fully spent during 23-24, and then additional costs being funded through the remaining reserves held within the SELEP accounts. Just considering the reserves position, during 22-23, there was a net contribution to the operational reserves of 259,000, although the overall movement in reserves was a net reduction of 1.4 million, primarily relating to the application of the funds that had been set aside to support the delivery of the COVID-19 recovery programs. In addition, we also have a number of earmark reserves which were established during 21-22 in recognition of the ongoing financial uncertainty facing the future of the LEP at that time, and throughout 22-23. The reserves were reviewed to ensure that there was sufficient funding to remain to support known commitments and risks within the LEP. And this meant that in addition to the earmark reserves already in place at that time for the COVID recovery programs, new reserves were agreed to manage the future service commitments, potential redundancy payments, and other risks. When these reserves were established, it was in anticipation of seeking to sustain the role of the LEP and meeting the associated costs of the accountable body. However, obviously, since the end of the financial year and since these were established, we've had confirmation from government back in the summer, as was discussed in the previous item, around the closure of the LEP. And we're now undertaking a process to review the overall financial position and the reserves position to understand what the commitments are that will be required to fulfill the requirements in the current financial year, and the residual position that will be required for 24-25. So just picking it up in summary, this table sets out a summary position of the reserves balances at the end of 22-23 of 3.3 million, but also includes the forecast for the current year of anticipated reserves at the end of the year of 2.65 million. It's expected that the reserves at the end of the current financial year will be required to meet any costs of the accountable body into 24-25, cover off any kind of residual staffing costs and any other similar liabilities of Essex County Council as the accountable body. But in addition, there's expected to be, as was referenced in the previous item, some potential uncommitted reserves, and the expectation is that we'll take those to the February Accountability Board meeting, at which point we'll be looking for a decision with respect to the distribution of that funding. The just to highlight, I guess, in terms of a risk around that respect, is the level of ongoing uncertainty around the overall position and requirements for the upper tier local authorities from 24-25, and the publishing of that guidance from government is absolutely key to inform that, and in that respect, and also to give any indication of any funding that might come from government to support those operations for upper tier local authorities into 24-25. The other uncertainties with respect to the overall reserves position will be impacted by any kind of further delays in delivery, decision making by the LEP, etc., and any other considerations from government, particularly with respect to releasing the accountable body in its current role with respect to supporting the SELEP. So overall, the financial position for the LEP continues to be monitored really carefully. We'll be providing an update to the Accountability Board in January on the position prior to that final position being brought to the February Accountability Board. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody's got them on in respect to the council or anything I've just discussed, but I'll leave it there for now. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Lorna, and thank you to you for all of your work and all of the accounts. So if we could stop sharing the screen, and then I could open it up to the board for any questions or comments. Great, thank you. I can see you all now. I couldn't see you before. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any comments or queries on those accounts? Nope. Okay, so I would like for you to confirm that you've considered the SELEP statement of accounts 22-23, and that great, thank you, and ask whether you approve the South East LEP Limited statement of accounts 22-23. Great, thank you very much, and thank you to Lorna and the accountable body for all of their work on this. Okay, let's move on to the updated position on GPF funding. Helen Dyer, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you.
Perry, is that an old hand? Sorry, just checking. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, Helen, thank you.
Thanks. So, as you will recall, at the last meeting, consideration was given as to the preferred approach for disaggregating the available GPF funding at the end of 23-24. It was agreed that the GPF should be disaggregated to each upper tier local authority as a total of their existing GPF loan allocations and their proportion of the funding currently held by the accountable body. Indicative figures showing how this split of funding may work were presented at the last meeting, and these figures were based on the assumption that all GPF loan repayments due in 23-24 would be made in full. Since that meeting, East Sussex County Council have advised that it is highly unlikely that the 3.575 million repayment due against the Sovereign Harbour project will be paid prior to the 31st of March 24, and a request for a revised repayment schedule has been submitted. At this meeting, the board are asked to consider the proposed revised repayment schedule for the Sovereign Harbour project, and this is required due to the project having been subject to previous repayment schedule changes, and also to consider how this repayment schedule change should be managed. As a point of clarification, it is not intended that the approach to disaggregation of the funding endorsed at the last meeting is revisited. Considerations in this report revolve solely around the Sovereign Harbour project. So firstly, just provide a quick overview of what has been proposed by East Sussex County Council in relation to the project. The project was awarded £4.6 million GPF in March 2014 and has to date repaid 1.025 million of this loan. As I've mentioned, the project has been subject to a number of previous repayment schedule changes, with the most recent considered by the board in February 2023. The current repayment schedule requires full repayment of remaining balance owed on the loan by the 31st of March 24. It was intended that the mechanism through which the final repayment would be made provide either refinancing or the sale of the building, which was delivered through the project. Refinancing was determined to not be a viable option, and therefore a sale of the building was pursued. Whilst efforts have been made to sell the building, East Sussex County Council was advised by Sea Change Sussex as delivery organisation that it is unlikely that it will be possible to conclude an open market sale of the building by the 31st of March 24 at a price which would be sufficient to pay off all outstanding debt. This is due to challenging market conditions which are affecting the UK property market. The terms of the loan agreement between East Sussex County Council and Sea Change Sussex allow for the transfer of the building to East Sussex County Council at market value minus the outstanding debt if full repayment is not made by the 31st of March 24. And this option and its implications are being explored by East Sussex County Council. There's a significant amount of information gathering and due diligence required to enable the transfer of the building, as well as additional work to establish future options for the building. Consequently, East Sussex County Council have submitted a request for revised repayment schedule, which delays the final repayment from 23-24 to 25-26. So if I just move on to the options that are set out in the report contains 3 options. These options have been informed by the 3 key considerations which reflect the shared ambition of the board as discussed at the last meeting. These considerations were the shared desire of the board to achieve the greatest level of parity possible when considering disaggregation of the GPF funding at the end of 23-24, the expectation of government that LEP activities will transfer fully to local authorities by the 31st of March, and the need to minimise the ongoing obligations of the accountable body post-March 24. Option 1 represents the simplest scenario and allows the proposed revised repayment schedule for the Sovereign Harbour project to be endorsed by the board with no additional conditions applied to either the project or East Sussex County Council's wider GPF programme. Whilst adoption of this option would support the transfer of LEP activities to local authorities by the 31st of March and would minimise the ongoing obligations of the current accountable body, it does not align with the desire of the board to achieve the greatest level of parity possible. As a separate consideration, as set out previously, there is an outstanding accountability board decision in relation to the Barnham Green project and its continued inclusion within the GPF programme. This decision is due to be taken by the accountability board in January. This report does not seek to preempt this decision, and therefore the implications of all options have been considered in light of the continued inclusion and the removal of the Barnham Green project. So going back to option 1, assuming the continued inclusion of Barnham Green, the remaining balance owed on East Sussex County Council's GPF loans at the end of 23-24 would be 4.554 million above their per capita share of the total GPF pot. And this compares to 0.979 million as presented at the last meeting. In order to mitigate this, it would be necessary to proportionately reduce the level of funding issued to Essex County Council, Medway Council, Southend-on-Sea City Council and Thurrock Council. Should the Accountability Board agree to remove the Barnham Green project from the GPF programme, this will reduce the balance owed on existing GPF loans and will reduce the impact on the other local authorities. And it should be noted that option 1 can be actioned. However, it is not recommended in the report as it does significantly increase the level of disparity across the SELEP area. Option 2 also allows for the proposed revised repayment schedule to be endorsed. However, unlike option 1, it seeks to mitigate the impact of the repayment schedule change on the level of GPF funding available for disaggregation, thereby increasing the likelihood of achieving a greater level of parity across the SELEP area. This option involves East Sussex County Council taking on responsibility for issuing the 1.75 million GPF funding allocation awarded to the Barnham Green project. Future repayments made against existing East Sussex GPF loans could be used to fund this payment. It is acknowledged that this option would likely delay the release of funding to the Barnham Green project and will therefore likely impact on the delivery programme. However, This option provides the greatest level of certainty with regard to partial mitigation of the impact of the delayed repayment against the Sovereign Harbour project. Should the Barnhorn Green project be removed from the GPF programme, it obviously won't be possible to reduce the impact of the repayment schedule change as just explained. However, removal of the project would allow the accountable body to release the 1.75 million currently ring-fenced to support the project, and this will ultimately achieve the same outcome. Option 2 most closely aligns with the 3 key considerations outlined, and therefore this option is recommended to the board. Finally, just to cover option 3, under this option, the proposed revised repayment schedule would not be endorsed by the board. This would mean that there would be an ongoing expectation of full repayment by the 31st of March. It is acknowledged that given that a request for revised repayment has been submitted, there is a significant risk of the repayment not being made, resulting in the loan going into default. Failure to make the repayment would significantly impact on the level of funding available for disaggregation. To mitigate this, option 3 proposes a retention of the GPF funding awarded to the Barnhorn Green project by the current accountable body until the repayment is made. Under this option, if repayment is received by the 31st of March, this will allow the GPF funding to be disaggregated in accordance with the indicative figures provided at the last meeting. However, if the repayment is not made, consideration needs to be given to a long stop date in relation to the retention of the funding allocated to the Barnhorn Green project and the implications if the long stop date is not met. This is considered in more detail within the report, but ultimately, to avoid placing ongoing obligations on the accountable body, the long stop date would need to be the 31st of March 24. As with option 2, it's proposed that if the long stop date is not met, the East Sussex County Council would take on responsibility for issuing the 1.75 million allocated to the Barnhorn Green project, potentially using future repayments made against existing GPF loans, thereby reducing the impact on the other upper tier local authorities. If the Barnhorn Green project is removed from the GPF programme by the Accountability Board, as with option 2, the approach would no longer be feasible, but it would release the 1.75 million currently ring-fenced. And that would be released to the upper tier local authorities. So whilst this option is feasible, it places East Sussex County Council in a position where they're at a higher risk of default on the required repayment schedule and introduces consideration of additional factors such as a long stop date and implications of not meeting this date. This option is ultimately likely to achieve the same outcome as option 2, but is more complex and carries greater risk of non-resolution by the end of March 24 and is therefore not recommended. I'm going to stop there because I've probably already confused everyone, but just to note that there are comparison tables set out in the report which show the likely outcome of each of the options considered in the report, and that is including Barnhorn Green and removing Barnhorn Green.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, so I've got Councillor Glazier and then David Shepherd, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I start by saying it's unfortunate we end up in this position at this time. And secondly, that the officers of the County Council haven't had the opportunity to discuss the recommendations that are put forward in any detail, simply because of the timing of this paper. But East Sussex County Council and Team East Sussex members obviously support option 1, as it provides the cleanest, simplest break in managing all of our ongoing obligations relating to the repayment plan put forward today on Sovereign Harbour alone. And to link that with the Barnhorn Green project would seem to establish a new precedent for this LEP, and a clear and to be very clear, this situation would result in a project partner impacted on by several external factors and not able now to make the full repayment, resulting in the need for East Sussex to do all they can to bring this to a resolution. And again, I come back to the board members back when the wording was agreed on the 13th of October, when we agreed option 2A at the Accountability Board, where it said in paragraph 2.112, disaggregate the fund for each upper tier local authority as a total of their existing GPF loan allocations and their proportions of funding currently held by the accountable body. and accept that total parity has not been achieved. And it goes on to say that the board could choose to accept the disparity between local authority areas and continue on that basis, which is what we agreed back in October. So if you look at option 2 and 3, as I say, which the board, Team East Sussex doesn't endorse for the following reasons. The option is not consistent with the long-held GPF programme principle that upper tier authorities shouldn't be held financially liable if projects don't succeed or their failure is on part of the project delivery body, as the risk is always laid with the central GPF pot to take that hit. We also note the board's desire to achieve best level parity when considering disaggregation of all the GPF funding, but it does mean that this can't be precise, and explained that, and that was understood at the on the October 23 meeting. Historically, we've always made decisions on projects approved on their own merits rather than meet the exact proportionate distribution of funding. And it does appear here that East Sussex are now being penalised for projects that have been assessed within the area rather than on the merits of each of them. And the example cited in the paper consistently evidence that none of the options can be fully achieved on parity. So on option 2, the unrealistic as payment to cover Barnhorn project, if approved in January, will not then be made until the earliest, until 26, some 2 years away. And that's not going to mean that Barnhorn would then be able to go forward. So other factors that are likely to influence all of this, it certainly isn't appropriate for the board to set unrealistic expectations of how those funds will be assigned, firstly to Barnhorn Green. We've never done that before, and it's setting a really a precedent that I'm not happy with. And on option 3, it's not acceptable that East Sussex have been very clear about how and when the Sovereign Harbour loan will be recovered. It's there in the paper, and it's extremely unhelpful to disregard that and the information that has previously been supplied, in our view, not being considered here today. So it's not appropriate to make Barnhorn dependent on the repayment of Sovereign Harbour, and when the project has not been started and there's no relevance to Sovereign Harbour. So all in all, we could sit here all day and discuss the merits, and I'm sure the board will want to comment. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Councillor Glazier. David Shepherd.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at it from a slightly different perspective. This is a business-led strategic board, and therefore we should be making informed, business-like decisions. And what I'd want to see was that the stakeholders who are involved had been fully consulted in the time that was available. That doesn't seem to be the case, and this data has become available at very short notice, and I understand the reasons why. And I don't think from what Keith's saying is all the stakeholders have had time to truly evaluate the impact that's going to be on their particular interests. And I particularly mean, the precedents, as Keith was outlining, that are included in some of these options about linking projects, and some of the contradictions which are there, which is related to the whole idea of parity. What strikes me particularly in saying this, from thinking it from our board perspective, is that many of us were sat on the GBF valuation committee last Friday, and we came to some very pragmatic decisions about treating every project that was submitted for GBF on their merits. And as a result, the best projects, or the appropriate projects, were chosen for the pipeline and priority. It so happened that East Sussex, for instance, didn't get any projects into that priorities on the pipeline. So the best projects, the meritable projects, won out. And I would have thought that precedent is the one that ought to follow through to the decisions that are being made here. And so that option 1, I think it was said it was the simplest option. Seems to me the obvious one, that we as a board should just maintain our position that projects are chosen on their merit, and that it goes to the accountability board, both of them, for different reasons, the reschedule for Sovereign Harbour and for Barnum Green as a new project, to make the decision on the same basis that we've been making decisions for the past life of SELEP. So from a business perspective, there is continuity in terms of the decisions that we're making in the past and the decisions we're making now. We're not introducing new and setting new precedents, and we're certainly not putting contradictions in terms of the way that we're treating projects on their merits or not. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Can I just, for a point of clarity, can I just ask Helen, when we heard about this repayment, so I'm just wondering about the timeline, because that's been mentioned a couple of times about the time space in which officers have had a chance to look at this. Can I just clarify that, please?
I can't remember exactly when the repayment schedule request was received. It's been since the last meeting. I think the challenge has been with the run of board meetings. It just wasn't possible to prepare and develop the options in relation to this until last week, because there was just investment panel kind of took over everything. I think it's just unfortunate timing that it meant that there wasn't as much time as we would normally have liked, and we would normally have allowed more of a conversation with East Sussex. It's just timing did not allow that because of the run of board meetings.
Thank you, Helen. Okay, so I have David Rayner, then Councillor Bayliss, then Councillor Edwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I just wanted to come back on something that David has just said, which was that the projects at the investment panel were decided on their merits and the best projects went through. As some of you know, I don't believe that was the case because of the strategy that SELEP adopted of splitting the projects that were put forward by each federated board 50-50, and because Success Essex only put forward 2 projects, one got into tier 1 and the other one, as with all the others, was put into tier 3. So I don't believe that the decision was taken last Friday on all of the projects on a merit basis, but rather on a geographic one. And I think form has outweighed quality.
Okay, David, I think that's I mean, thank you for your comments. I think I'd like to come back to that in a minute and just bring in the accountable body on that, because as far as I understand, we followed all due process in those decisions. But let's just stick with the current item at the moment. Councillor Bayliss.
Yes, I just wanted to restate my declaration of interest. Sorry, I should have done it at the beginning of this debate, and also that I will have to leave a little bit early the meeting. So
thank you for that, and duly noted. Councillor Edwards and then Simon.
Thank you, Sarah. I agree this is a really significant decision, and there has really sort of been limited time for, I think, even us as a local authority to consider our position and some of the precedents which have been sort of described earlier. I think that probably there's limited potential to push this decision, but I will raise the question about whether it definitely needs to be taken today. I think that parity absolutely should be a factor that we consider in the options that we look at. I take the points that Keith has mentioned around looking at the fund as a whole and SELEP as a whole, but I do think as local authorities we are responsible for the projects that we are managing, and we are accountable for and have to take responsibility for that. You know, I am not just necessarily looking at things with just a a Medway Council hat on either. So the previous approach that we agreed, I think we lost out to the tune of about £175,000 on that particular approach. But we accepted that it was in the broader interests of SELEP as a whole, and it was a simpler option, and we were happy to take that hit because we could see that it was in the interest of everybody. But under the options that we're looking at now, you know, option 2, but particularly option 1, we are losing out really significantly as a result of this. And I understand the various things that we have to consider, but I do think we should be, you know, weighing up some of the fairness across the local authorities who have repaid their loans or don't have outstanding loans. We certainly have been, you know, I had a very strong question that came up, I think it was from Vince, a very right question about, you know, what are you planning for the expected money that you'll be, you know, receiving back on GPF? And we have been operating on the basis of getting a set figure of, I think, around 2.2, 2.3, and you know, this would really have a significant impact on that. And I appreciate that we need to be nimble, but I think we need to really significantly weigh that issue of fairness and parity across the local authorities who are being affected by this project, which, you know, has I think had to you know, go through 3 different sort of rounds of relooking at things.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think I'm probably just going to say different words in different orders, that which Lauren's probably just said, I guess, really, which is fundamentally there's an assurance framework that we have to follow, and I think you'll probably bring in the accountable body in a moment just to give us some assurance as directors that we're still following that process. But of course, the reality is we're in unprecedented times here, aren't we, with something coming to a close very soon. So it means there's going to be pressure on those timely decisions. I think for me, again, I know we didn't want to go back to the previous conversation when we first agreed this, but if the 6 upper tier local authorities are comfortable in veering away from that decision around parity, then that makes our decision easier, doesn't it? And it's down for those 6 local authorities, I guess, to agree that, because we have to be fair and equitable. And as directors, I guess we've got to make sure that we are seen to be being fair and equitable if that is what we've previously agreed. So I guess I'm saying the same stuff that Lauren has just said, just in a different way and in a different order. So I'd be interested to hear from the local authorities if they are happy to move away from that agreement around parity as best as possible around GPF.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Glazier. You're on mute.
Just to answer Simon's question directly, he chaired the meeting, I think, when we, as an accountability board, agreed that total parity has not been achieved and couldn't be achieved, but we would need to get there as most as we can. Listen, I agree with Lauren totally. I could give you the timelines of when East Sussex sent in and when East Sussex were told this and that, but it doesn't help and doesn't take things forward. All I say to you is, in the current position, we haven't had time to work out what the options of anything other than option 1 will affect not just us, but the rest of the team. And if you need to make this decision today, I would suggest you are setting precedents that will be unhelpful in the future. That's the point I raise. We may not all have agreed, may not have all liked the decision that we took in October, but we did agree it, and it's it's there as a record. You can't unwrite it. So all I just say is I accept the inconvenience it's caused us. We have a clear plan now on how that money will be paid, but not until 26. And so it would delay Barnhorn beyond the point that it could be delivered. But I also accept the problem that it would create for the other authorities. So if it's likely that we're going to go to a vote and option 1 is not supported, then I think the accountability board needs to look at the whole thing again and give us time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Glazier. Michael Newman, can I bring you in at this point, just from an accountability board, accountable body point of view, about the assurance framework and the process that we would need to go through, and to assure us that this is whether this is the due process that we are following at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. In terms of this particular fund, it's not subject to the assurance framework. So the process that was agreed at the accountable board at the time did allow for non-parity across members. But at that point in time, the decision was not made with the knowledge of the non-repayment of the 3.5 million loan. So there was a notional allocation of funds across members, and it wasn't based on parity. If I recall, I believe both Medway and Essex were taking big hits in terms of the discrepancy between the allocation and what based on the per capita process in terms of distributing the full funds. So I'd say at this stage, it is only right we reconsider the approach in view of the knowledge of the delayed repayment of the 3.5 million loan. But if we are unable to make a decision today, we can do so through an electronic decision or refer a meeting.
Thank you, Michael. So Simon asked a question whether there was any other comments from any of the other upper tier local authorities, as you would be the organisations most affected by this decision. Can I ask whether you have any comments you'd like to make? Other, Lauren, you've made yours, thank you. But Councillor Gough or Councillor Scott, Councillor Gough.
Thank you. Sorry, just unmuting. I mean, I think this is, as everyone has said, exceptionally difficult because we've got sort of two principles offsetting each other. And I heard what Keith has said from that side, and equally Lauren's point. And I can hasten to add, of course, from a Kent point of view, we are genuinely disinterested in the sense that it makes very little difference to us which of these, in fact, makes no difference to us, which of these options is taken. So in a sense, we can kind of stand back from any direct interest we have. I have actually two questions, if I may. One is, do we have much sense, and apologies if I missed anything on this, but I didn't hear it said, about the likelihood of Barnhorn Green actually progressing? And I appreciate that is, it's not a point of principle. It's a contingent one that might assist a fudge, but it's always worth understanding it on that basis. And the second is, going back to what was said earlier, I want to make sure I've understood this correctly as to who would make what decision. Clearly, we can seek to make a decision today. There was a suggestion, I think, from Keith's part that certain things, presumably the points of principle, could go back to the accountability board, presumably revisiting its earlier decision, I think was or considering whether it wanted to do so. I think that's what was said, but I want to make sure I've understood that correctly. Or is it simply that if we don't make a decision today, we need to make a decision possibly via electronic vote or whatever, with, I presume, some other information or just time to consider it further? I'm not quite sure what the options are, so I wanted to understand that.
Thank you. I think let's bring in Councillor Scott, and then maybe Helen, or Helen and Helen can answer the options in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I've listened to what everyone said, so I'm not going to repeat what's been said. I agree with a number of things that have been said, but from Essex's point of view, if there is a vote today, we'll be supporting option 2. That's really my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Vince, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just struck by the comments of Keith at the start of this that said his officers hadn't had sufficient time to consider the other options. And I think if we try and take a decision today, we'll be doing so without other potential solutions that East Sussex may offer. I think it's probably pretty clear from this discussion that there's not, from my perspective as independent, there's not a unified outcome here. I think the position for Essex and Medway is very difficult, and I think it might be good to give East Sussex a bit more time to think about the options and profile, and whether there's anything else they can do which brings Medway and Essex a bit more into parity before putting it to a harsh vote that it appears like the principal council involved hasn't had time to listen to. That's just my view as an independent.
Thank you, Vince. Councillor Glazier, can I ask sort of how much time you need your officers might need to consider this? Because Michael, as I understand it, suggested just now we could take this to a electronic vote if needed, if there was more time needed. I'm just very conscious of time scales.
I don't know exactly a time, but as I understand it, we asked for some more time and the opportunity to comment, and we're told quite clearly there is no opportunity to discuss these currently. They're just off for sign off now, and then they were out the next day. So, and again, this is not a criticism of the team, because we're all up against deadlines, and we totally understand that. But if we're going to go to a vote without having the opportunity to understand what other opportunities arise from the other options, then I think we would feel disadvantaged. But I would just suggest that it's as quick as they can. I mean, they've had opportunity from the time that they saw the paperwork till now to come to some initial conclusions. I'm sure they can do some further work quite quickly.
Thank you, Helen. And Helen, the Councillor Gough asked some specific questions. Have you got any answers to those for us at all?
So in relation to your first question around Barnhorn Green, that, as discussed at previous accountability board meetings, is due to bring forward a change request in January. Work is ongoing with East Sussex County Council officers in relation to that change request at the moment. But we are expecting a definite decision one way or the other to be taken in January around that. I can't really give an indication as to which way it's going to go at the moment, but it is definitely still on the agenda for January accountability board. In terms of decisions, so the ultimate decisions around the agreeing the split of funding and agreeing the revised repayment schedule sit with accountability board. This board have been asked to consider the revised repayment schedule for Sovereign Harbour, partially because it has sought previous repayment schedule changes, and the board have previously agreed that all projects which have multiple repayment schedule changes, so more than one repayment schedule change, need to be considered by this board before accountability board. And also because obviously it does impact on the outcome of the decision that was taken at the last meeting. So we will need, as Michael said, there will need to be a decision from this board. It can be done through an additional meeting or through electronic procedure. The challenge with the electronic procedure is, unless we get to a position with East Sussex where there is just one option to be considered, it's very difficult to do an electronic procedure, because it kind of needs to be a yes or no type decision, because otherwise it's a bit complicated for electronic process. So if we can't take a decision at this meeting, then I think whilst we can continue discussions with East Sussex and see if there is one option that would be acceptable to all parties to be brought forward, otherwise we would potentially be looking at an additional meeting to discuss it, because we can't leave it until the March meeting, because then accountability board have no more meetings to make the definite decisions on figures. We obviously need this to be considered before we can take those decisions at accountability board.
Thank you. Keith, so that you trying to raise your hand, or are you no? Okay, so it feels to me like we've got a few options. We've got a few options in front of us. We have three specific options in the papers. We have a kind of fourth option, which is delay the decision and wait for some more information. But as Helen just outlined, if it's not just a simple proposal coming through, that does mean we would have to have another meeting, and I am slightly anxious about the impact of that on both getting quorum and also the impact on officers in terms of everything else that they're trying to do at the moment. So just to recap, in terms of the timeline impact, if we didn't make a decision today and there wasn't one simple option presented to us for electronic vote, we would have to have another meeting, because it couldn't take place in March because we're meant to be closing, transitioning. So that that does present quite a challenge. So Councillor Galasian.
I hadn't recognised in my briefing we do have an option 4 that may help us through this. So can I just read it? It's not a long suggestion, but we'd ask the board to support and endorse an approach that good decision making involves East Sussex County Council, SELEP and Essex County Council as the accountable body, holding further discussions on each of the options and the impacts presented. We then ask that the SELEP Strategic Board endorses the approach that decision making is agreed to sit with the SELEP Accountability Board members to determine the decision on both the repayment plan presented to Sovereign Harbour and separately on the Barnhorn Green project to determine whether it has met the requirements to receive GPF funding. Both of that was for January. Whether that delays too long, I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you. Can I get advice? So, Michael, I'm probably being stupid here, but can I just clarify that would that proposal fit with the assurance framework, or is that doesn't matter because this doesn't sit within the assurance framework?
This doesn't sit within the assurance framework,
Okay.
and to be honest, I'm not quite sure what the option was. It did talk about further discussions, but I'm not sure if it had a resolution itself.
Well, the difference is, yes, have those conversations between the accountable Essex as the accountable body, SELEP team as the people that are determining it, and East Sussex County Council, just to further discuss each of the options, and then ask that the SELEP Strategic Board endorses the approach that the decision on an outcome from that would sit with the SELEP Accountability Board members to determine on both the repayment plan, which is the cause of this problem in the first place, but equally and separately on the Barnhorn Green project, because what we're trying to do here in setting a precedent linking one to the other is holding one to ransom while one payment is repaid. And so it's just that principle that we need to overcome. And so it's basically whether the strategic board wants to leave this in the hands of the accountability board. Could be done electronically.
Okay, thank you. Michael.
That potentially could be an option. I'm not quite sure. I think we would need to get the legal opinion on that itself. But I just wanted to touch on the note of setting a precedent. The process itself in terms of sharing these residual funds is a precedent in itself because it hasn't been linked to any specific project. So that was considered at accountability board itself. So we are already in uncharted waters and any decision we make is already a precedent.
Thank you. And I think also, I mean, I just want to say the precedent issue is also very challenging because we're in extraordinary times of trying to close transition the organisation. Ordinarily, we wouldn't be discussing things like the parity issue so much because we wouldn't be in a process of trying to close these agreements down in this way. Simon.
Thanks, Erin. I suppose maybe to I'll try and rephrase this as well in a different way, I guess, because that particular option that Keith has just shared with us, I guess, is really where the nub of the decision needs to go. So I guess provided that the non-local authority members of this board who might feel that they can't vote on something that they don't know about, fundamentally for me, this goes back to the agreement we made around trying to make sure we get parity as best as possible before we knew what had happened with a couple of projects. And realistically, that's those members on the accountability board who make up all of the 6 upper tier authorities. So I think that would be reasonable provided that all other directors in this particular meeting are pleased or are content that the accountability board make that decision. Because that's where it boils down to, really. As long as the upper tier local authorities are content in the change of the share, that's the brutal decisions we're going to have to make, I guess, in the short timescales that we've got left.
Okay, thank you. So let's first of all, before we even go to that proposal from Keith, we need to note that in advance of any decision by accountability board in respect of Sovereign Harbour loan repayment, East Sussex County Council have to be are required to confirm to the accountable body that Sovereign Harbour project will continue to comply with applicable laws, including relevant state aid and subsidy control rules. And I believe that there are still some things to be clarified on that. So I just want us to note that for the process of this meeting. And then we are being asked, Councillor Glazier, would you like to read out your proposal again so that everybody has it? So thank you.
I'm sure we can, and I'm sure someone technically could transfer it to you. So we would ask the board to support and endorse the approach that good decision making involves East Sussex County Council, SELEP and Essex County Council as the accountable body, holding further discussions on each of the options and the impacts presented. We then ask that SELEP Strategic Board endorses the approach that the decision making is agreed to sit with the SELEP Accountability Board members to determine the decisions on both the repayment plan presented for Sovereign Harbour and separately on the Barnhorn Green project to determine whether it has met the requirements to receive GPF funding.
Okay, thank you. Perry.
I just say, I personally, I'd be happy with that. The only thing I think is missing is a timeline. There's a timeline. So, you know, if it could be, Keith, that we have all of this and this is all concluded by, let's just, I'm just picking the date, 31st of January 2024. I think it would be quite reasonable to put a timeline there that the board then, by agreeing this, will actually know when it's going to be concluded by.
Perry, the next accountability board, I understand, is the 12th of January.
So it would have to be by then. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Councillor Edwards, then Councillor Gough, and then Simon. Thank you.
Sorry, just for clarity, to understand, is the sort of delegation to the SELEP Accountability Board, is that just a matter of us avoiding having to have a separate meeting, and because we know we have that one in the diary for January? Is it kind of an efficiency point of view? I'm just wondering the driver behind it.
I think it's both an efficiency point of view, as far as I understand it, and also a time for it. It would allow, I believe, what Councillor Glazier is suggesting is it would allow time for some of a longer discussion to happen and a response to look at the options in greater detail. Is that right?
Sorry, well, also it is where the financial accountability sits. With no disrespect to the board that we have today, actually the decisions on financial have always sat with the accountability board. So it's just putting it back where it should be, I think.
Thanks, Councillor Gough, Simon, or Stephanie. Was there something of legal importance to bring in here first?
I think just to clarify whether we're actually talking about delegating something, because I think what we're talking about is the conversations that would happen outside of a meeting. Anyway, it's not a formal delegation that we're discussing.
No, but the decision of the outcomes from that discussion will need to be formalised somewhere, and we're suggesting it should sit with the SELEP Accountability Board.
And is that legally okay? Yep. Okay. Councillor Gough, Simon.
Very brief point from me, which is, I mean, I think supportive of the approach that Keith has outlined. When it comes back, I think the last bit was talking about the decision in relation to hang on, I've forgotten the name of the other project. Hang on a minute. Which one will be the Barnhorn Green? Yeah, Barnhorn Green is due to come back anyway, isn't it? That statement, that change request is due to come back on the 12th of January, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah.
In which case, that seems to me to reinforce the case for it, because in a sense, we have all the relevant factors. I take the point that they need to be formally considered separately, but they are all factors in the equation. And I think it makes sense, therefore, to dovetail all that to the 12th of January Accountability Board.
Okay, thank you. Simon, you had your hand up.
Yep,
Thanks.
that's
Yep,
okay. It's
sorry.
been picked up and Steph picked up what I was going to say.
Okay, all right, okay. Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Yes, if I could just say that I'd be content with that. It was only if we were going to be forced to have the vote today. But if we're not, I'm content with Keith's approach as well.
Okay, thank you. It sounds to me like there is a majority. Well, let's take it to vote actually. So that we agree what Keith has said, and I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, so I can't read it out to you. But I think you all understand. I mean, the only thing I would point out to you is it potentially has the the board did make a decision in October that we would try to address parity as much as possible. I think there is something about maybe this board could make a request that the accountability board takes that into consideration when looking at those options. Yeah, otherwise, can I ask whether you agree with the proposal put forward by Keith as the option 4, as it were, to this meeting? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. These things are always challenging when you're trying to operate under the timeline that we are trying to operate on. So thank you very much to you all for your due consideration, and to the officers for all of the work they've done on this. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the local growth fund and Getting Building Fund update.
Thank you. So this report seeks to provide an update on 3 specific elements of the LGF and GBF programmes. Firstly, the report provides an update on the development of the new GBF prioritised project pipeline. Applications for funding were sought in line with the process agreed by the board in July 23. Following local federated board prioritisation processes, 15 projects seeking total GBF investment of 7.555 million were put forward for consideration by the investment panel. As has already been mentioned, the investment panel met on the 1st of December, and the new pipeline, as set out in Appendix B of the report, was agreed by a majority of attendees. Funding decisions for those projects prioritised for receipt of the available GBF funding will be considered by the Accountability Board in January, and steps are currently being taken to secure the required approvals from central government for the inclusion of those projects. Secondly, the report provides a brief overview of the projects which have been identified as being high risk. And this covers both the LGF and GBF programmes. In light of the decision by government to not provide any further core funding to LEPs and to seek the transition of LEP activities to local authorities, it is a responsibility of Accountability Board to ensure that the capital programme is in a strong position for handover. Therefore, updates on the status of all high-risk projects and any required decisions regarding ongoing retention of LGF and GBF funding will form a significant part of the agenda for the remaining 2 Accountability Board meetings. Finally, the report provides an update on the LGF project pipeline. The board agreed in October 2020 that the LGF pipeline should offer the opportunity for existing LGF projects to seek additional LGF funding where the impact of COVID-19 had led to a funding gap due to cost increases and/or local funding sources no longer being available. The pipeline was agreed by the board in December 2020, and the majority of projects on the pipeline have now received the additional LGF funding sought. However, given the amount of time which has passed since the pipeline was agreed, and in light of the increasing number of LGF projects which are now being reported as complete, consideration has been given as to whether the remaining projects continue to meet the criteria agreed by the board at the outset of the pipeline development process. The review has concluded that the Southend Airport Business Park project and the A13 widening project should be removed from the pipeline as they have both been reported as complete. The University of Essex Parkside Phase 3 and Dartford Town Centre improvements projects remain in delivery and will therefore be retained on the pipeline at this time. And the revised pipeline, as set out in the report, will be used to facilitate the reallocation of any LGF funding which is returned to Essex County Council as accountable body for SELEP prior to the 31st of March. And finally, just to note that it is intended that a more comprehensive update on the capital programme, including consideration of the impact of the programme, will be brought to the March 2024 meeting. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Helen. So we're just asked to note this report. So thank you very much for that. Are there any questions or comments? No. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to item 9 now, Delegated Authority for Greater South East Net Zero Hub. Jo, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So, excuse me, it's catching. Greater South East Net Zero Hub. This has been operating for several years. It's a consortium of the 11 LEPs that cover the Greater South East geography. And this partnership of LEPs was formalised by a partnership agreement back in 2019. The partnership agreement enabled each of the 11 LEPs to be represented on the hub board in an advisory capacity to Cambridgeshire Peterborough Combined Authority as the accountable body for all funding that is administered by the Net Zero Hub, and that comes typically from Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, formerly BEIS. So SELEP consequently has a seat on that hub board and has done for some time. And the purpose of the hub really is to administer funding from DESNZ to deliver a pipeline of local decarbonisation projects. And as I said, the hub operates in an advisory capacity to that funding and how it is administered. What's happened recently is the partnership agreement has expired, and what has been agreed and is supported by the monitoring officers and legal as well is that that shall be replaced by an updated terms of reference to the hub. And that is what is included in the board pack for today. So the board is being asked today to note these reviewed terms of reference and to delegate responsibility for agreeing them to the SELEP CEO and the accountable body. And what I would say in support of that is that SELEP has been directly involved in the review of these terms of reference for several months now, partly to look at the processes that are established for administering any funding streams going through the hub, and equally to make sure that the new terms of reference recognise the LEP transition and the policy change within government that is being pursued by DBT. So we are confident that these reviewed terms of reference do recognise appropriate processes. They are fit for purpose in our view, and they recognise the transition that we are going through, particularly in SELEP. So with regard to the governance, the board is being asked to agree that SELEP continue to be represented on the hub board until the 31st of March next year, and also that this representation can be delegated down from the SELEP CEO to a member of the Secretariat. And to note, please, board, that this will not create any financial liability to SELEP or the accountable body. So those are the decisions and notes that this paper is asking of the board today. But if I may, I'd also like to give an update on the where we stand with upper-tier local authorities being involved in the hub board post 31st of March next year. So in the terms of reference as they currently stand, and that's included in the board pack, it does state that in the review terms of reference, there will be one seat available for all LEPs represented in the Greater South East area, and that means one SELEP seat going forward. So I've been talking with the hub for some time now about the fact that we really realistically need 3 seats on the hub board to represent the 3 economic areas of SELEP as defined by the transition guidance, and that was agreed at the most recent hub board on Tuesday. So as a result of that board meeting, the terms of reference that you have in the board pack will be amended again to include to accommodate the need for 3 seats on the board going forward from the 1st of April next year. And I think that's a really, really good outcome. What that will mean in realistic terms is that will be discussed as part of the transition work stream, and we're already talking to the relevant leads in our particular local authorities about how we can manage the transition from 1 seat to 3 seats from next April. So nothing to note or decide on that, but it's a most recent update and a very good outcome for us. That's it, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jo. Personally, for me, a really important area of work, I believe. So thank you very much. So we are asked to note about, are there any questions or queries first? Sorry, I'm just conscious of time. No. And we're asked to note the reviewed terms of reference in Appendix A. And then we asked whether we agree to delegate responsibility to the SELEP CEO in conjunction with the accountable body for agreeing the final terms of reference in a form substantially similar to terms of reference agreed in Appendix A. Do we agree that? Thank you. Great. And do we agree to the representation of SELEP on the board and the remit of powers defined in the review terms of reference, including permitting of any further delegation from the CEO to a member of the SELEP Secretariat? Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just conscious of one of the things that I mentioned earlier on, was a comment, a query by David, or comment by David Rayner on the LGF. And I just wanted to come back onto that because I felt there was something that I hadn't, we hadn't confirmed, that the investment panel decisions were in due line with the assurance framework. And Michael, I just wanted you to confirm or deny that for us, please. Thank you.
From an accountable body perspective, I can confirm that the process we followed at the investment panel was in line with the requirements of the assurance framework, and consequently, the majority decision taken by the panel was also in line with the process. Just keeping in line with the assurance framework, the final decision itself to award the funding will have to be made by the accountability board.
Okay. Thank you for that point of clarity. Just thought it was important to come back to it. Okay, so I'd just going on to AOB. Are there any other AOBs from anybody else around the room? I just want us to note that the date of the next board meeting is going to be on the 22nd of March, can you believe it, in 2024 at 10 a.m. and it will be in person. So I'm really hoping that we will all have a moment to get together and to celebrate and to mark all that that you guys have achieved, everything, and the work of the officers and everybody. Michael, was that a raised hand? So is there something?
Sorry, it was a raised hand. I've just received a message, so I'll read it out in verbatim.
Okay.
And it's just to raise a point in terms of Sovereign Harbour. So it's just taking into account agenda item 7, and in respect of Sovereign Harbour loan repayment, East Sussex County Council will be required to confirm to the accountability body that the Sovereign Harbour project will continue to comply with applicable laws, including the relevant state aid subsidy control rules.
Thank you. I think I did read that out before we went to vote, but absolutely it's really important that that is noted and that goes back to accountability boards to ensure and check that that is all agreed, that is all clear beforehand. Thank you. Councillor Gough.
Thank you. So it just goes back to what you were saying a moment ago, Sarah, which is the 22nd of March. Do we have a venue for it?
No,
my diary has it as a Zoom meeting still at the moment, but
we're hoping to be in London. I think we decided it was probably the easiest place for us all to get to. So in London, 10 o'clock, venue yet to be confirmed.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. And obviously we know that between now and March, a huge amount of work is going to be going on in terms of the integration. It may be that we will have to call an extraordinary meeting of the strategic board during this time, and I mean, we hope not, but it may just be that we have to do that. We'll only do it if it's absolutely required, and we will keep it to the minimum time needed, but obviously we would need to be quorate, and we'd really appreciate your support and attendance if we do have to do that. I did mention that I was going to say something about Joe James, who has been part of this board for a long time, who has been absolutely instrumental to its success and to everything that has been achieved over the last few years. So, Joe, I just wanted to say a huge thank you from us all for all that you have done. You have been a friend, a mentor, a brilliant person to have on board. So from the bottom of my heart, and I know from a lot of us, a huge, huge thank you to you for all that you have done.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I just say, I mean, you know, it's been 12 years. I think I did attend the first SELEP board meeting. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. You know, I think as a group, it took us a while to get through our teething issues, if that's a polite way of calling them, but we did. And actually, I see the SELEP board now very much as a coalition of the willing. And you know, working along the fantastic SELEP team, because we have had an amazing team. I think we've achieved collectively a lot for the region, and it's been a pleasure working with each and every one of you. And I'm sure all the good work will continue through the federated boards, and we'll really support our communities. And from my perspective, really want to support our business community. So yeah, thank you all, and enjoy celebrating those successes in March when you're in London, because there has been a lot to celebrate. So yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Joe. Well, maybe you'll be able to join us for a drink at the end of it or something. That would be fantastic if you were. So thank you all very much for coming. I can't believe I'm about to say this because I still don't feel ready for Christmas, but have a very happy Christmas when we get to it. And just to extend again my thanks to the team for doing the most incredible work in an incredibly short amount of time, and to the local authority officers. And obviously, especially Helen, I don't know whether you know, was meant to be away this week, spent quite a bit on holiday, spent quite a bit of her week working when she was away on holiday. So not only are you here when you're ill, but you also did amazing work when you were meant to be off. So thank you to you and to all of the team for all of your incredible work, and to you all for being here and continuing to see us through to this transition. Thank you very much all. 1 minute spare. Good to see you all. Take care.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.